What's going on, CDL fans, and welcome to the CDL recap. This is a quote-unquote series that I'm gonna do. I'm not sure if I'm gonna do it after every day of matches or after like every weekend of matches, but basically, like it says in the title, this is a CDL recap where we recap everything that happened in the matches that happened before I posted this video. This is literally just a sit down and talk about the matches. I give you, my thoughts and analysis on what happened. You can get down in the comments to let me know what you think, but this is just a super casual video. We sit down and we talk about the CDL. And I'm hopefully going to get a 1080p webcam, so I don't have to have this, smaller webcam in the middle with this overlay. I only have a 720p webcam, so this is just what we got to work with for now, so it fits the screen and doesn't look stupid. But with that being said, let's just hop into talking about what happened this weekend. So obviously, a lot of things happened, and I can't touch on everything, but one of the first things I want to talk about is success of London and Seattle. Obviously, two of the worst teams in the league. Last year, Seattle was even was worse even the year before. But two of the worst teams turn it around all of a sudden. Let's talk about that. So first things first, you have to give praise to the GMs and the people who built these rosters. They played it smart. They went with young talent, hoping that either one, this young talent was going to be cracked and they were going to do really good, or two, the young talent might not do amazing, but at least, it's a reasonable thing to be like, oh, we got a young roster, we're not doing too good, it's not a big deal, right? We're still young. So we got a bunch of vets who are doing bad. So I think for one, big praise to them for being able to pull this off. But for me personally, I think the biggest reason these teams are so good is they're super motivated and they have the drive to prove how good they are. When you watch, when you listen to the comms of both of these teams, or you look at their face cams while they're playing, you can hear the intensity, you can see the intensity on their faces and their comms of just how serious they're taking these matches and how locked in they are. And I think that is a reason as to why both of these teams are 2-0, because a lot of these veteran players or whatever might not be as motivated to prove themselves, might not have that drive to be like, all right, we really got to, play our best. We got to be as locked in as we can, because they're like, we'll be fine, right? It's a long season. We can do it. Similarly to maybe FaZe or OpTic or NYSL, or these teams that have these all-star players, these veterans on them, might just be like, yeah, whatever, right? We'll figure it out by the end of the season. We'll be fine by champs time. But these teams that have a lot to prove, like London and Seattle, I think that's why they're doing so good. They always say that, the team that wants it more is a team that's going to do better. And I think that really is what's happening with these two teams. They just want it more than the teams that they're playing as of right now. And I think that's going to show to a lot of other teams, and that's going to change the dynamic of the league as a whole. I think we're going to see a lot of teams are really turning up because they realize, like, hey, if we want to keep up with these teams that are filled with young guns, right, who have more energy than we do because we're veterans, let's say, you got to turn up. You got to lock in, and you really have to want it as much as they do if you're going to beat these teams and going to solidify yourself in, let's say, the top 6. The second thing I want to talk about that really stood out to me is NYSL does not look good. Like, they, personally to me, they looked like the worst team at the opening weekend. Like, obviously they're not the worst team, but they really looked super bad, and it's honestly really sad to see. I mean, they only won one map at opening weekend. They lost 3-0 and then they lost 3-1. Yes, they played the Seattle Surge and then they played LAG. Neither of those teams are obviously bad teams, nothing to turn your head at, but they just looked awful. I mean, other than like Hydra having his moments, this team did not look good. Neptune, no offense to Neptune, looked really poor in opening weekend. Crim6 and Clayster, honestly, like, they had their moments, but they didn't look that good. And even Hydra had his moments where he didn't look good either. So this team really has a lot to work on. I think they have to work on literally every aspect of their game, especially search and destroy. But I just think, like, there was just something about this roster that just was lacking. I think we heard in one of their comms, again, in the Seattle series, Crim6 was telling Nep and Hydra to slow down. He was like, guys, calm down, like, slow down, pull it back. And I think part of that could be a problem with, like, just the fact that these are two young guns that like to just run out and just fry and just try to, like, get up in people's faces. And you got two main AR players who aren't slow players, but they're having trouble keeping up with these young guys who just spawn up and go, where I think Crim and Clay spawn and they analyze the minimap, they analyze what's going on, and they're like, okay, this is the right play. Whereas Hydra and Nep, they spawn and they're just like, all right, let's get back in the gunfights. So I think there's a dynamic there they have to work out between those two duos of the veterans and the young guns. But overall, NYSL looked really poor to me, and it sucks to see, but I do think they can turn it around and find themselves back in, probably like a top 5 team. one series specifically I want to talk about is Atlanta versus Paris. Obviously we saw this go to game 5, and yes, FaZe won, but Paris really showed out. Temp and John were frying, which is awesome to see. And then like Simp and Abizi honestly had a pretty slow weekend overall, especially in that series. I think this series in particular really shows you how much like how balanced the league is, how much parity there is in the league this year. You had FaZe last year who won champs, and you had Paris, who was arguably the worst team last season, right? And is still arguably the worst team this year. Go to a game 5 in opening weekend of Vanguard. I think this really shows that the league can go either way this season, right? A couple of rounds difference in that search and destroy, and we're looking at the best team losing to the worst team, right? And I think this is great for the league, right? You have teams that can really come out. I think any team can beat any other team on any given day, right? Obviously we could say, all right, FaZe is probably going to win like 90% of their matches, but I think at any point they can lose. And last season I couldn't say that. Last season I was confident that unless they were playing like, you know, Toronto, they were probably just gonna win. So this season it's awesome to see how balanced the league is, and I think it's important to keep the viewers interested. Obviously it's only opening weekend, so there's not much that we can compare this to, but if every match comes along and you really don't know who's gonna win, I think that's awesome. In my predictions for all 10 matches, I got 3 out of 10 right. Last season my predictions were pretty solid. This year I only got 3 out of 10 for opening weekend, and I think that goes to show just how you never know what's going to happen in these matches, and I think that makes the viewing experience way more interesting. Plus the game is super fast paced, so that also helps. I'm just really excited to see how everything continues to go throughout the season, and if we start to see, you know, the front end start to pull away from the back end of teams. But I really do think that bar a few, maybe like 1 or 2 teams falling off or 1 or 2 teams pulling ahead, I think we're really going to see a strong, you know, 3 through 10 in the CDL throughout the entire season. And last but certainly not least, yes, there's a lot of things we could talk about, but I don't want this video to be like an hour long. I just want to talk about OpTic. Personally, as me, who's someone who, you know, OpTic is the reason I got into competitive Call of Duty back in the end of MW3. I hate seeing OpTic do this bad, especially, you know, with Scump on the team. Just like most Call of Duty fans, you know, I do find myself rooting for OpTic in just about every series, but they look decent. You can see the individual skill, and the individual skill wins them maps and gets them to these game 5 round 11s, but they just lack the teamwork to close out these games. They get a pick and then they just start pushing. When you get a pick in a game, let's say like Valorant or Counter-Strike, the first thing you do is you group back up and you see how the other team reacts to being a player down. In Call of Duty, especially in Search and Destroy, that should be how they do it. There's a reason these games like Valorant and CSGO do these things. You got to get together, you got to play your life advantage. You know, you have 4, they have 3, right? You have the advantage when it comes to trading. Unless one of their players makes a hero play, which there's pretty much nothing you can do about that, you have to get the odds in your favor. You get together, you push as a team, you don't line up in a corner, no, like you did in Cold War. You have to work together, and that's a thing that OpTic has really lacked for a very long time. And even with different rosters, they still lack that. So, you know, it begs the question of why does that happen? It's still early in the season, so we're not going to get into that totally. I think Rambo and Sender can get this team on track. And like I said, you know, they lost in game 5 round 11. So this team doesn't look terrible, right? They still look like a competent team. They just can't close out games, and that comes down to teamwork. There's a reason that you see Toronto close out games. You know, there's a reason that you see Minnesota close out games. It's because they have this teamwork, and it's super strong. The communication is good. And we saw Toronto lose to Seattle, right, in that game 5. The reason they lost, and Bance said this in the flank, well, he was in chat when I was watching the flank, but they were talking about it, and Bance said it was a communication breakdown between him and Kleenex. And when you don't have that communication, you're going to lose. You're not going to close out maps. So OpTic has to work on that, whether it's their communication, whether it's their, you know, nonverbal communication, just knowing what each other are going to do. They have to figure out, you know, why this is happening. But yeah, that is our CDL recap after week 1. Let me know what you think. What do you think is like the #1 headline for this weekend? Drop that down below in the comments. I want to see what everyone thinks. And with that being said, I will see you all in the next video, which will probably be my power rankings after week 1, which you should see coming soon. So thank you all so much for watching, and see you in the next one.